Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I think it started in the early to mid 2000s. Basically, it's an economic block, but also a like defense block. So if you think about what's an analog, like large treaty groups, NATO would be the biggest one if you think about it, between the North American democracies and Western Europe. I would say this SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This one should be on front page news. If you know NATO, there's no excuse not to know what's going on with SCO at this point. So if you think about it, if we drew these on a map, what you would really see is the Asian continent itself, the giant landmass. Everybody on the landmass has now been kind of organized behind this entity, which is really led by China, I would say, hence the name Shanghai at the in the title. Um, but this meeting just took place this last week, and this is where the massive developments are taking place, in my opinion, on the realignment from a unipolar to a multipolar world, right? So I think I'll open up. Cameron, you have any questions there or comments there? Big things going on, but this SCO meeting last week, this is something that probably deserved a lot more coverage than it's getting in Western
I
media.
think my only
Uh,
comment is first off, I agree. There's been very little coverage. I think I've seen memes, frankly, online of just I think there was one with Modi and Xi and Putin walking together, and just a lot of comments on what language do you think they all speak when they talk to each other, things like that, but not very deep analysis on what does this actually mean, how does it actually change the power structure across the world when obviously that's happening. And then the second thing I would say is that I think we need to be watching what is going on with how Trump and kind of the U.S. is responding to some of this because there's a lot of folks here in the U.S. as well that even I speak to that kind of say, well, I don't get why there's backtracking on this or that, or I don't get why this thing happened a different way than I expected it to, and it's because the world is changing. You're seeing different alliances forming, you're seeing different relationships happening, and this is part of what's going on.
yep. Yeah. If you talk about, everybody tends to think there's a massive war coming, right? Well, it's going to be hard. When you've got this type of consolidation and cooperation between the entire Asian landmass. The way I would view it is all of these economies now, which have tended to be historically very difficult to organize and cooperate amongst each other, as well as very difficult to build infrastructure because everything needs to be built on land, right? These are landmass countries with maybe ports on the outer edges, right? If you think about Southeast Asian countries or the Chinese coast, et cetera, the northern landmass is pretty much covered in ice and difficult to use as ports. That's where the Arctic lanes opening up potentially is a massive development in the decades ahead. But historically, these tended to be resource or viewed in the old model that's dominated for centuries. Colonial mercantilism. These have been viewed as resource countries. The resources are extracted, or their local labor is basically taken advantage of for um, obtaining manufactured goods at low prices because the labor doesn't have its ability or the governments don't have their ability to push back and defend themselves and uh, capture or defend more of that value within their own domestic economies. What I view this is basically now they can stand on their own. We haven't been at this period in history since the old Silk Road had been basically viable in Marco Polo's journeys, right? Basically at the turn of the last millennium. So this is a massive development that's ongoing. I won't get too much deeper into it than that, but gold, defense, everything like it's kind of where the action is happening on the global geopolitical front. I'll leave it there. But the key thing I think coming out of this is China and Russia um, executed a deal, maybe not everything signed on the dotted line, but it's basically happening now. This Power of Siberia 2 pipeline that's basically going to connect the Russian oil and gas resources. So think Gazprom, all of those pipelines that used to be heading towards European markets as the final consumer. We're seeing with the Ukraine war, the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, all of that, basically cutting off Russian access to the kind of the remaining G7 ex-China, Western European markets. We've now got a deal between Russia and China to build out the infrastructure, highly capital intensive, all of that, especially what's going on in finance and money and since 2022, right? But basically, they agreed they're going to build this Power Siberia 2 project to connect the Russian oil and gas resources coming out of the Urals, Baku, etc., and cut through Mongolia and essentially bring those natural resources to the Chinese coastal markets as the ultimate source of demand. So I think this is something that's not showing up on the front page of Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. But this is truly a massive development in global energy markets because if you think about building an economy, right, you start with affordable energy access, right? And this solves two things, solves important problems for both Russia and China. China in terms of access to dependable economic and cheap energy resources in terms of Russian natural gas, and Russia as well in terms of an end customer, right? Because ultimately your barrels and British thermal units in the ground are, you know, useless within an underdeveloped or developing domestic economy. It's not fully industrialized unless you have a buyer or a consumer on the other end of the transaction to uh, to to finance your own economic growth. So huge development here that took place at the SCO summit, particularly at the energy layer of the global economy. You might not have heard a lot about it in the past, but I think this is truly massive. And essentially, the other repercussions here are in terms of Western Europe for energy supply. At this point now, you're going to have to compete with China, right, as a buyer, and maybe China will underprice you, but they're also a friendlier customer, right? I don't think you're going to have to deal with the Xi Jinping government or his successor blowing up this pipeline infrastructure that say your domestic economy has invested in. I think China and Russia tend to be on much better terms ever since the fall of the USSR. And that kind of conflict ended and has entered a new era in Russia-China relations, which by all outward observations, from my perspective, China and Russia tend to be getting closer and closer together. As well, you could even add to that, it looks like India is also kind of becoming a friendlier relationship with those two countries as well. So the real risk here, if I'm looking at this deal, you got to question Europe, right? If you're Western Europe, where is your energy supply going to come from, right? Essentially, your other market. Well, do you look to other Mediterranean oil and gas production? Do you look to you could always go to the Middle East, of course.
Middle East,
You could look at
Africa.
North Africa, but really for any incremental demand like LNG, you're probably looking at US, right? So very interesting development going on. Has geopolitical repercussions, but basically this is to me it looks like don't fade the integration that's coming from that's really coming on the tape of this SCO summit this past week.